Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications at SBAM. Welcome to Small Business Briefing number 248. We have quite a few things to discuss with you today, but first up, we have a very special guest, and I'm going to let Brian do the introductions.
Yeah, I got my old boss on the program today, and that is Governor Rick Snyder. You know, before the time as governor, he spent some time in the computer industry, as you might remember, in the Gateway days. Remember those computer boxes that look like Holstein cows? And well, anyway, it was kind of a strange, in most circumstances in my career, I've always been like one of the younger people around, and yet when I went to work for Rick Snyder, I found that the younger person was getting computer advice from his boss, which is kind of the opposite of how it worked everywhere else. And so, Governor Snyder, first of all, thanks for joining us here today. And I thought what we'd talk a little bit about, especially with what we see happening with just the rise in cybersecurity threats, and something that really a lot about, all things tech and networking and computers and so forth. It's one of these risks that are out there. So thank you for coming on. Welcome. And maybe just give us a kind of overview of the types of threats and the kinds of things that people need to be thinking about when it comes to their own business cybersecurity.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to, Brian. It's great to be back with you again. And you're looking good with the beard. We sort of reversed that one. I had the beard for a while, and now you got the beard. I dropped it. The mask was too much trouble with the beard. But one of the things I've always thought, if you're going to be involved in the IT world and technology, you have to be equally responsible with sort of the negative, the scary side of it. And that's where I'm passionate about cybersecurity. And the cybersecurity risks have gone up exponentially just in the last few years. And it's something we all need to worry about because we're all online in some fashion. Just to give you an idea of magnitude, over 40% of the data breaches a little over a year ago, because the data is a little bit old, affected small business. So it's not just about big business. It's not just about personal stuff. It's hitting right in the heart of small business. To give you an idea of scale, in the last 12 months, the attacks have gone up over 400% in terms of frequency of attack. And that's scary. That number is not going to go down because it's too easy to attack. Basically, they're blanketing everyone to see who they can get to bite. And so when you get to the hygiene things or the health things that you mentioned, that's where a lot of this requires common sense. And the other word I'd give you is skepticism. So instead of just believing everything you get, you sort of have to be a skeptic. And one of the most common ways people get in trouble, it's called spear phishing. It's phishing with PH instead of an F. And that's basically that famous email you get that talks about, it may be from somebody you know, it may be coming to you in some capacity that, hey, this looks pretty interesting, and it'll have a link to click. If you're not sure that it's something really coming from that person, do not click that link. That's one of the greatest troublemakers we have out there, are people clicking on one of those emails and getting themselves in trouble. So that may allow a virus to get on your computer, other kind of malware. The other thing is if you get one of these and it clicks and it sort of entices you to give information, anyone asking you for credit card information should set off danger Will Robinson red alert kind of status to you to say, don't do it, most likely. One of the big scams going on recently has been giving you free things. So you'll see these surveys, you'll see other things saying you can get something for free. But once you click on it, it'll say, well, you should pay for shipping. And as soon as you enter your credit card information to pay for shipping, if it's from the bad guys, there are good people trying to do this, but if it's from one of the bad guys, they've got your credit card then.
That reminds me of a scenario. It hit me, the sophistication of what they're able to do these days, that somebody sent an email to the staff members at the Small Business Association of Michigan, several of them. It looked like it was coming from me. It showed my name, but if you look at the actual email address, it was not my email, but it looked like it was coming from my name, and it was kind of chastising employees for not updating their human resources records, and that they needed to make sure that you don't miss out on this week's payroll. You got to re-enter your information and double check it here. And thankfully, we spend time on cybersecurity here, and it was in a tone that was obviously not something that I would send out like that anyway. I'm not a stern talker to people.
Yeah.
And so it stuck out. But really, the sophistication of somebody having visited apparently our website, or maybe this could be done automatically, but to identify me as a position of authority at the association, and then to pull out other team members' emails and to send something out like that, it really that really was a jolt. Like, wow, that really did. If had our employees not been up to speed on the dangers of just blindly following these types of orders, then it really could have put us at risk.
Absolutely. So if you get those kind of situations where you're not sure, you don't want to just hit reply even back to that person. You want to go in your case, Brian, you would start a new email to Brian Calley off the address is correct, and saying, by the way, did you send me this email? Those are the kind of things you check. Or if you have any doubts about any of these kind of places, I even call them sometimes. If you see a place that's asking you from the outside world for information, it's like, well, instead of using the phone number on that email or that email they're giving you, find out a different email, the right email from some other independent source, or just call them up and say, can I talk to a person? I got this. What should I do? And is this legit? But you're right. Two of the most common ones, I would give a particular warning in small business. If you're one of the accounting people, finance people, or you're an HR person, because two of the other most common scams people are getting are the payroll one, where they'll get an email from somebody saying, hey, I've moved, I've changed, here's my updated banking information. So please change over my direct deposit to this new account. And again, it's not legitimate. The other one is the famous one in the accounting side, particularly with supply chain issues. So with the supply chain being a problem now, it's like, okay, you get an email saying, we have a crisis in our supply chain. We can't get the materials from these people. We're able to buy it from these other people. Please wire money right now. Wire $10,000 to these people right away.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, and even, so large and small, everybody's a target. And if you think about even I know we've been kind of hard on the folks at the state regarding the unemployment system, and $8.5 billion that were inappropriately paid out in benefits, but about 2.5 or 2.4 billion was literally fraud. And they have big IT budgets and sophisticated systems to try and prevent that kind of stuff, and yet we're able to get away with that level of fraud. And so it's definitely something that we really want to elevate for members to think about. And when you consider the things that are happening abroad right now and the reputation that warfare, we're seeing it, the old style warfare right now, but the new style warfare, it's in the IT world, and something that Russia is quite good at wreaking havoc. So we definitely view this as a risk. And so Rick, thanks so much for coming on and spending some time. And one of your other, most of our people would know you as from the political world, but to share some of your other talents with the audience. Thank you.
It's great to be with you. And yeah, again, be skeptical if you see some of these emails. If they don't look right, check them out before you click on anything. So it's great to be with you.
Thank you.
All right, that's good. I like it. Be skeptical. I think that's good advice for everyone here. So Brian, let's change gears here and let's talk about labor force participation. the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity released some new data, and I think you're prepared to share some slides and kind of show us that info today.
Yeah, I'm gonna just bring up a slideshow, and the source of the slides, as you had mentioned, was the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. So I really just grabbed their slides. And I'm going to present it because I thought it was a very compelling but also thorough picture in the form of graphs and a lot of the stats and things that we've been talking about. So first is looking at these gray bars. These are the number of unemployment insurance claims that happen month by month. So look at this April all the way up here at about around 800,000 people, 829,000 people. Really incredible. And then looking at the, and then even though it came down, I want you to just kind of look across this landscape of unemployment claims month by month. Yeah, those are a lot lower than these months here, but still higher than pre-pandemic norms. So the overall unemployment situation still high relative to pre-pandemic times, though it's a lot lower than it was. And then the unemployment rate, you can look at this Michigan's unemployment rate got up to 22.7%. The national unemployment rate peaked out at 14.7. You can see both dropped sharply after 2020, but then you see later on here, comparing Michigan pre-pandemic 3.8% unemployment rate. Right now we're 4.9. And then the U.S. still above pre-pandemic levels, so 3.5 to 4.0, but closer. So Michigan's still kind of paying catch up. So if you look back, when Michigan's unemployment rate was a lot higher than the rest of the nation at the peak, it has both that and the U.S. have come down, but still kind of playing catch up here on the U.S. numbers. The labor force, these labor force numbers, you can see Michigan versus the U.S. So you see Michigan drop down lower again than overall in the U.S. So if you figure 100%, Michigan and U.S. pre-pandemic as 100%, our labor force dropped down here about 8% from its original standing, and it popped right back up. But look how it just trended right back down after it popped back up. So it went down, it popped back up, and it trended down, and then it kind of flattened out, and it flattened out at about 3% or so lower than before. Looking at the U.S. rate, it's a slow increase, but at least a bit of a gradual increase. The part that's disheartening about this is that the Michigan and the U.S. experiences are actually getting further apart here in recent months. Looking at the overall labor force in Michigan, so look, pre-pandemic there were 4.928 million people in or 26 million people in our labor force. In January 2022, 4.795. So a net about 130,000 fewer people that are in the labor force today as compared to pre-pandemic. So if it seems like it's harder to find people, well, there's 130,000 fewer people in it. Now, looking at the overall labor force participation rate, you see it's 58.9% total people in the workforce right now. That includes those that are full-time employed, part-time employed, and also unemployed. And those who are not employed but are 16 and over, that's kind of how this stat works, all the time, retired is the biggest part. As people get older, obviously naturally less likely to work. So this is not the change that we're showing. This is how it is today, not what it changed from, but what it is today. 22% retired, and of course in school, college and high school, both as well. But this is what I found to be probably the most interesting slide, and that is that that overall, this is not 16 and up, but 20 and up, age 20 and up. You'll see that there are almost 200,000 fewer women in the workforce as compared to February of 2020. Slightly more men in the workforce, about 22,000 up. And so as you look at so many of the different changes and the challenges over the pandemic, clearly the fallout from schooling has fallen more on women than on men. Of course, that's not going to be a surprise to anybody, but the difference in it is so stark here that whereas it's it's kind of literally the opposite experience depending on gender. The now in terms of overall payroll jobs, you see that February 2020 we were up at near 4.5 million. January 2021 it had dropped down quite a bit. Now remember, things got closed down in January, December and January 2021 again. And so this was kind of a low point again from there's a low point in April, low point again in January, and it has recovered some since then, but again still chasing that pre-pandemic level. This is another interesting slide where it shows the employment change in a bunch of different industries. So you'll see the overall, the service industries are the ones that have struggled the most. So you got leisure and hospitality down 8.5%. Other services is 4.5%. Education and healthcare services here, information technology, or I'm sorry, not information technology, but information services. Information technology would be in this professional services here. But and then it also, these dots show just what the overall wage scale is in terms of an hourly equivalent rate over on the other side. And kind of the inverse of that is that those same industries that were down the most are the ones that have increased wages the most. So leisure and hospitality up 13.4%, and other services up 11.5%, education and healthcare up 11.7%. So those industries that were having the hardest time have responded in terms of filling their positions and kind of getting back to where they were before, have raised wages the most. And then this is a look at inflation. So the darker line here is the one that includes everything, including food and fuel. So there's two different inflation indexes where because food and fuel are commodities and they're very volatile. Economists will look at this both ways, but you see both are rising quite a bit. And so for this particular index, there's one that's the metro area, and then there's another one for the whole state, 6.2%. If you don't include fuel and food. And it's also important to note that this is through February. This is pre-Russia-Ukraine war. So if it feels like it's gotten more difficult since then, it has, but it was already on a pretty big increasing base. So this is really, I thought it was a pretty insightful list of outcomes and kind of a deeper dive into what has been happening with respect to labor force participation. So we can see what's been happening by industry. We can see the industries that have struggled the most to fill their positions, the ones that have increased their wages the most to compensate for that, and then also where we stand today as compared to pre-pandemic. And it's clear that we still have a long way to go to overall recover. And the labor force participation rate, you saw where Michigan's was kind of flattened out and it was starting to rise back up with the rest of the nation. That's a big concern, but it has a lot to do with our demographics. We have an older population on average here in Michigan. And so for us to get back is going to be that much more difficult. But I think the real story on and the overall experience there is that that our economy is still winning, or is still struggling to win back women employees into the workforce overall.
And I know that another impact that the pandemic had, and now the labor shortage is on downtown areas. So we're located in downtown Lansing. A lot of the businesses here rely on workers who are going to stop in for a coffee or lunch, or to do a little bit of shopping on a break time. So I've kind of been monitoring Lansing. I think we all do around here, but what is it looking like in Detroit right now?
The Downtown Detroit Partnership, recently there was an article where an interview featured some stats that they had been keeping track of that I thought were pretty insightful and perhaps telling in downtown areas and business districts that previously had many more office workers. So Lansing is definitely a famous example, especially with the state not bringing people back into the office at a very robust clip. Areas like Lansing have really struggled. At the low point, according to the Downtown Detroit Partnership, that about 25% of downtown's workers were still in their offices, and now it's back up to about 40%, and they projected that it would get up to about 75%. And while that, of course, is an improvement, over the current status quo, and certainly from the low point, that's pretty transformationally different if it settles in at that 75% level. I mean, it's that much smaller of a market overall that was set up to serve those office workers. So that's a really big change. You might even say a sea change. Now there is some thought that a lot of these spaces right now that are office could be converted into residential and have more kind of permanent year-round and kind of week-around population in downtown areas like in Detroit, and that could also kind of change the character of the economy there in ways that perhaps over the long term could end up being better. But it's these types of transitions are pretty painful. The other thing that was pretty interesting was that they had indicated that about 15% of businesses were just gone. And so they're just out of business or have permanently moved or closed down. And so that was, it's hard to estimate that. There's not like when a business goes out of business, short of a bankruptcy filing, which most of them do not result in bankruptcy filings, there's not really an official notification of some sort that you can look at. So these numbers are kind of hard to estimate. But in this case, it was estimated about 15%, and actually that's not as big as what I would have expected. However, in that area, there are a lot of very large employers, and so I suppose if your mixture of large, if it's more scaled toward or more leaning toward larger employers, the chances of having gone out of business might be less. So that was an interesting factoid that came out of that article. And then the final thing I'll mention was that in terms of visits to downtown, they climbed to about 22 million last year after falling to 13 million in 2020. And so that's a pretty big improvement over the low point of 2020. But for perspective, 35 million visits to the downtown area is what the pre-pandemic, the year immediately preceding the pandemic looked like. So a big difference, moving in the right direction. All of those stats cited moving in the right direction, but all still signaling a very, very difficult transition that is in front of downtown areas, places like Detroit.
Just another good reminder to support your local businesses when possible. Brian, on Friday, I think it was Friday, Governor Whitmer vetoed a tax proposal. So what's next?
Yeah, so Friday night is when you put out news that you're not particularly excited about putting out. And so it's not unusual for there to be things like, hey, you're going to veto a tax cut, do it Friday afternoon or early Friday evening, getting into the news cycle, not a lot of people paying attention. But this wasn't a surprise to us or anybody who watches our briefing, because we told you that the income tax cut that was passed by the House and Senate, sent on to the governor, she had signaled that she was planning to veto, and she did. This would have scaled the rate back from 4.25 to 3.9%, and also added in a child tax credit and doubled the exemptions for retiree income from the income tax. So those are vetoed and sent back to the legislature, and they, because of the margins they passed on, a veto override is not in the cards clearly. The governor also put in her veto letter that she planned to veto the gas tax holiday that was sent along. The gas tax holiday, this is basically a 6-month pause, if you will, or 6-month suspension of the 27-cent gas tax. But the legislature has not sent that on to the governor yet. So she couldn't veto that yet because she didn't have it in hand. Kind of a formality at this point, because this is a little bit of inside baseball, but there are 2 votes required on every bill in both chambers. So the House and the Senate, they have to pass the bill, which requires just a majority of the senators or the representatives elected and serving, but they also need a supermajority, a 2/3 vote, to get immediate effect. And this is the difference between if a bill goes into effect right away when it passes, or right away when its effective date is stated in the bill, or if it has to wait a few months after that legislative session ends. So in other words, the end of this legislative term, there's a session called sine die, or to adjourn without day, adjourn without coming back, the end of that entire legislative 2-year legislative session. You have to have 2/3 votes to get that. They did not get 2/3 vote on that gas tax pause. So it wouldn't have gone into effect anyway, but the governor is still planning on vetoing it, rather than having another veto letter next week if the legislature sends it on to her. She went and put them in both of them in the same announcement for that Friday night kind of news dump. So at this point, where does it go from here? The governor had said, she doesn't like those. Maybe she would do an exemption of the gas from the sales tax, which is 6%, at $4 a gallon. That would be about 24 cents a gallon. It said she might consider, or she would consider doing that for 3 months. So we'll see if the legislature responds to that. Chances are, if they do send her an exemption on the gas tax, or on the sales tax on gasoline, it probably would be for longer than 3 months, or maybe it would just be a permanent exemption. It is one of the struggles that we have here in Michigan. Michigan is one of the very few states that has a gas tax and a separate sales tax on gasoline. So that sales tax goes to schools mostly, not to roads. So it puts us in this predicament in Michigan where we have pretty high gas taxes according to the national average, but the spend on roads is less because part of it is sales tax, not gas tax. So the idea of getting rid of the sales tax on gasoline has been kicked around for a while. So we'll see. Governor said she would solve it. She would sign at least a pause. My guess is that if the legislature sends her something, it'll probably go a little bit bigger and further than what she had announced support of.
All right, we're going to close out the show with Data Monday. And as you get ready to do your slides, Brian, I think we have now realized or looked on the site today that masks are no longer recommended by the CDC in any of Michigan's 83 counties. So I know you're going to talk a little bit about the stats and the trends, but what does that mean for MIOSHA rules?
And, just looking at the map here, you can see that that none of Michigan's counties are considered to be high transmission areas, which means that the CDC no longer recommends masks. Now, why does anybody watching this care? It's because MIOSHA goes by the CDC guidelines. So when I went back to MIOSHA and said, hey, when are you guys going to say something about the idea of these mask recommendations backing off? The answer was, well, we don't really say anything because we just follow CDC, whatever they say. Well, CDC now does not recommend it. So unless you're in one of the industries that explicitly is required still under regulations like healthcare, nursing homes, public transit, it's no longer required by the CDC, and therefore MIOSHA would no longer hold a business if there was a complaint or an investigation to that standard. There are only 6 counties in the last couple of weeks that were considered high transmission, and now there are none. Looking at the US stats, you see the number has kind of leveled off, but still going down. So looking pretty good on that.
Are you going to share your screen for us, Brian?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that I was. Let me go back here. You'd think I would know how to do this by now, wouldn't you?
It's okay.
All right, how's that?
That's great. Thanks.
Okay, so here's the map. Shows Michigan is not high transmission anywhere. Here's the U.S. numbers. You see continue to come down, leveled off some. The ICUs and hospitalization again nationwide still coming down. These are coming down pretty sharply. They'll start to tail off when they get down this low. Deaths by day still coming down very sharply. This will probably continue to come down for another couple of weeks before kind of leveling off. I wanted to show this is the United Kingdom. So this is in the UK or Great Britain. The numbers, they have been rising over the last 3 weeks there. So something to keep an eye on, this new, this is a subvariant of Omicron, which in Europe and Southeast Asia is causing some problems there. Most epidemiologists still feel confident that Michigan and the US has better kind of built-in immunity because of the size of the Omicron wave that we just had. Here's Michigan's numbers. So ours has, reached a pretty low point, but has kind of leveled off a bit. And then looking at hospitals and, ICU and hospitalization, both still coming down pretty well. So overall, good news here. It's still on the right track, and so far it seems like what's happening in Europe, which is kind of numbers creeping back up in Europe, but especially in Southeast Asia, where they had kind of like a zero COVID policy for a long time. Places like Hong Kong, they have low vaccination rates, especially including among their seniors, and also low previous transmission. And now in these Omicron, the contagious aspect of these variants that we deal with today, it's going to run through their population, and I'm afraid that they have some pretty tough times in their future. But as for the U.S., our built-in immunity seems to be holding things at bay much better here as compared to the rest of the Western world and around the globe.
All right. Well, before we go, I do want to say thank you to our sponsor, Marana Group, a data document and distribution company in Kalamazoo. I neglected to say that at the start of the show. So as always, if you have a project that you would like some help with, reach out to Marana Group. Have a great week, and we will see you back here on Thursday.
See you on Thursday, everybody.